Thanks for coming to hang out with us today. Ruck Up Buttercup is a podcast hosted by Deployed Love. We chat about real things that military families deal with and help you to love the call to action. So you know the drill. Ruck Up Buttercup. Ruck Up Buttercup podcast can be found on all your favorite streaming locations. As well, we are now available on Reach Across America Radio on Fridays at 11 p.m. and Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can find Reach Across America Radio on the iHeartRadio app, the Odyssey app, and the TuneIn app. Just search the word Reef. Can't wait to see you there. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ruck Up Buttercup. It's me and Ashley here for a girl chat. We are going to be going through the 4 steps to navigating a deployment. We both have more experience than we've ever wanted in our life in doing so. And so we've kind of put together a list of like the 4 steps that will get you through from the very beginning, like just finding out about a deployment, to all the way like back to having your spouse home. So that's what we're talking about today.
Oh my gosh, I know. And we've gone through different types of deployments too. So like we've gone through ones where we've had a year notice, we've gone through 6 months, and your girl has gone through 3 2-hour notice.
Yeah, so the first step is definitely preparing for deployments. I think that if your husband is or wife or whoever is in any job that's going to deploy, these things should kind of just already be done in your life, and it's just ready to go. Yeah.
I want to emphasize, like, don't wait for a scheduled deployment, because you never know what's going to happen, like, especially when it comes to like a POA. Like, you never gonna know, like, they could be gone for a JROTC cycle, a 2-week long like training event. You never know when you may need this, and it's not always easy to get that document. And there's different types. I wanted to make sure that we kind of talked about that. There are different types of POAs.
For very beginner spouses, POA is a power of attorney.
Yes. And you need a power of attorney regardless. Like, you should have a POA, whether it's just the simple generic one that allows you to do like the very basic things. But like, if you know your ID is going to expire during the next year, even if their scheduled deployment, it says that they're going to get home before that time frame, it won't necessarily, that could be wrong.
It's best to just
could get extended. Something crazy could happen and they could go somewhere else. Like, you never know this situation. So you need certain POAs for certain things. So like, if you need an ID, which is crazy, you would think that one would be kind of built in the generic one since it's coming, but it's not. You need a specific POA that says you are allowed to go and get a ID renewal, or if you lost your ID and you have to go get a new ID, you have to have that POA. We have it set to where our agreement, like, Jeremy just makes that POA for as long as he can each time, and then when it gets to the point where he has to make a new one, he goes and get it. But like, I remember him putting no on something, and I was like, nope, you have to go back and fix that, because this is why it needs to say, yes, I have authority. I'm not gonna go and like sell your truck, but like, if something happens to you, I legally cannot do anything for it, like, for months.
Well, there's so many instances, and it doesn't even have to be like something happening to him. Like, you're doing your weekly drive of the truck and you get in a wreck, you have no access to doing like getting repairs done, getting it sent to the shop, like, unless you have that saying that, hey, yes, this is my husband's car, but I have permission to get it fixed, kind of thing. So,
well, it also goes in just to making sure your name is on things. So like, utilities always goes in my name. We have been doing that for the last decade. I think when we first got married, they were all in Jeremy's name, and we quickly learned that most utility companies won't let you do anything if your name is not on the account. So anytime we move, I pretty much handle setting up all the utilities. I think the only thing that I don't set up is usually insurance, but Jeremy already puts my name on it. And just because I hate dealing with insurance companies, that's a whole nother like topic. But I always put it in my name because it allows me to make sure that I can call and say, I need to pay this bill, or, hey, why is my bill $300 more than it should be? Because in the past I've done it where I've called and they're like, well, your name's on the account, so we can't tell you, or you can't pay the bill. And that's just a whole,
I think that even goes to bank accounts. I know there's like a lot of people who have mixed opinions on like sharing a bank account, but in the military realm of things, it's really kind of significant to do so, because if something comes up where you need money because your job ends or whatever, and you need to still be able to feed your children, like I understand if you're both working and you think you can like sustain yourself, you never know what's going to happen. And so having access
Right.
to both funds
Mhm.
is kind of necessary.
I am 100% an advocate for having at least a shared account. Have your separate accounts, y'all. If you
Right.
want to have your own spending money, own saving money, that's fine. But the amount of spouses and this is like in the 50s or more that I have dealt with where they have been left on a deployment with no money. I'm sorry, but to me that is abuse. You
Yeah,
leaving
I
your
do. I
spouse
agree,
and
because
your
we've had some
family.
that came to like deployed love events where they're like, "Can you help me with this?" And it's like, "No, I mean, I don't have any money. Like, I can't help you financially." But they were just like left with allowances, or like cash was enough for the time they're gone. And then, especially, I think that was during the rapid deployment time that that girl had come to something, and it was like,
I
you don't
had
even
a
know when
lot.
he's coming back. How can he give you an allowance that's supposed to cover everything for the time
Well,
being? That like that's crazy.
this is really geared towards, and I get it, like some people, want to handle all their finances, like there are different things, but set up an allotment then. If you do not want your spouse to have full reign of your account, and if you're listening to your spouse, this is a way that you can go in, like have this conversation. But if your soldier is the person who's responsible for paying all the bills and things like that, then they need to have all of that set up beforehand. So they need to have all the bills set up on auto pay, because like especially like if you're in like an infantry 11 Bravo, if you're stationed at Bragg specific or Liberty specifically, you are bound to rapidly deploy. You may have a 2-hour notice, you may have an 8-hour notice, you may have a 12-hour notice. That is just our new normal. It's unfortunate. We are in a new stage of the military. And right now, that stage is yes, we have some people who are on scheduled deployments, but majority of our troops are on this IRF. If you know you're going to be on IRF and you have this recall, it's happened so many times, y'all. Don't get comfortable that it hasn't happened in a little bit, because it's going to happen at some point again. We're just at
Mhm.
that stage where everything is going batshit crazy.
Yeah, and so
And
the allotments can work out, because I think you should just sit down and the whole theme of this whole podcast today is going to be communication. But if you sit down
yeah,
with your spouse and this is just something that you're comfortable with, then that's fine. I get relationships that are like that, but you need to have a budget. Like, hey, I know that costs of food are going to cost this much, and so they have a good picture of like how much you literally will need to get by on a monthly time. And that needs to have an emergency fund. Then if you don't have access to the account and they're not willing to give you a power of attorney for the financial stuff, then you need to have some emergency funds worked into what you're getting from
yep.
them, because things happen. Cars break down, kids get sick, like, and we all know medical, though TRICARE is great, is not always entirely covered when you go to the emergency room or you go to like urgent care and stuff like that. So like you need extra funds also available. You can't just rely on like, hey, this was our budget and it should fit in here, because it might not.
Well, it's like this conversation, especially like preparing for it. Like this should just be like each year have this conversation, sit down at the beginning of the year and say, okay, this is what this is what we know we have on the calendar. This is what, could potentially happen, all these different things, go ahead and get the POAs, make sure you have a copy of their will or know where a copy of their will is.
Sure, that will is up to date.
Yeah,
Like,
that's up
yeah.
to date, the survival benefits is up to date. I'm pretty sure, like, I think I asked Jeremy, like, just a couple years ago, I was like, "Have you updated that? Like, have you updated it to include the kids?" Because, like, it initially was, like, me and his parents, and he was like, "Oh, you know
Hmm.
what? No, I haven't." I'm like, "Maybe you should go do that." And then, like,
Yeah.
that way we know that that is taken care of. Like, every
I don't
person's
think it's a
different.
bad thing also as a military spouse to have a living will, because
Yeah.
if something happens, your husband is deployed
I
and God forbid, something happens at home where even if you're just hospitalized, you need to have a plan for where your kids will go, or a plan for who's going to take care of your dogs and stuff like
Yeah,
that's
and
like
I think
written
that is
down
something
somewhere.
that we don't really think about because, like, they have that opportunity. It's been something that's been weighing on my mind for, like, the past year, and I have yet to go do it, but I don't have a will. I have not done it yet, and I keep going, I probably should do this. Like, you never know what will
You
happen.
never know. Just period. You never know what could happen.
I mean, I've had the conversations with like the people, but it's not written down anywhere. It's written nowhere that like, I've had the conversations that I would like for my sister-in-law and her husband to take the kids if something happens to me and Jeremy. I, you know, I trust that my sister-in-law will make sure that my kids are provided for, as well as make sure they see all our family members and things like that. I mean, I wouldn't mind them going to my mother-in-law or my parents as well, but I also know that they're in a different, like, they're, older. They're not wanting to have young kids and things like that. But at the same time, it's just who, loved. And so,
And that's something that can be worded in there, like this is the preference, and then they
yeah,
have the choice at that
yeah,
point to like advocate where your children
yeah.
would go. Yeah.
Just, making sure that there's things set up that it's just not chaos if something happens to your soldier or yourself after the event. And so having that, you know, all those things, all your ducks in a row is so unbelievable. I mean, like I
And it
told
feels
you,
so uncomfortable because I know, like, when we were talking wills the first time, we were 19. Like, who writes a will for themselves in 19? And
I
I
remember,
obviously didn't have one then for myself, but like the idea of being like, oh, well, I could die. It's
yeah,
real though. Like,
it
it
is.
doesn't even have to be like in an action war zone. Like, it could just be the helicopter crashes, like
Yeah, or
shit
just driving to
happens.
and from work, like, just,
Yeah.
so many things could happen, so having that up to date, like, I feel like that is such a good thing just to have, like, "Okay, hey, it's January, we're doing," like, as you're sitting down to do your taxes and stuff like that, sit down and have a conversation about, "Okay, let's look at the POA, the will. Do these need to be updated this year?" Go ahead and schedule it. There are so many resources out there that can help you write them, do them. You
Oh yeah.
can go to the legal centers. On every installation should have an office at least to help you guys do that. That's what they're there for. Don't wait until the last minute, because I promise you, the amount of spouses that didn't have any funds whatsoever, no access to bank account, through the roof.
Crazy.
Um,
Yeah.
especially if you're going to be purchasing a home or anything like that in the near future, having those POAs and specific POAs, so in case something happens, you can still close on your home.
Yeah.
I had two different families who, one family I think lost out on a home because they didn't have a POA and they couldn't sign the papers at closing in time. And then another one that fortunately was able to, but at the same time, like, when they're especially in the midst of like a rapid deployment and things like that, where it's just chaos in every direction, there's not a chance for them to get downrange and settled and then go over to the financial office, because
Yeah.
there's not one. There's not a
Mm-mm.
person there, and there's not a way to technically send things back as well. So just, I think it's important to have that conversation every year, express to your service member, especially if your service member, if your partner is like, "Hey, like, I'm not comfortable giving you full access to my account, because of X, Y, and Z," whatever it is. Have the conversation going, "Okay, well, then if you are on IRF, or as soon as you are 2 months up a schedule from deployment, then go set up the allotment so that way they're there. If
Yeah.
they're paying the bills, make sure all the bills are on auto pay, and make sure that there's funds in the accounts to make sure that those payments go through and things like that." So have those ducks in a row, and it should at
One
least.
other thing though that I want to include in like the prep stage of this is if you plan to go home during deployment, move home,
Mm,
know what your plan is of action, because I know at least over here overseas, if you leave your military housing or any of your housing for more than 30 days, your LQA disappears. So that you're going to screw, and you would still be trying to pay on a house here, pay on whatever it is back in the country, and you can really screw up your LQA. So I think that that's one of those things that you have to really know. Like, if you're planning on doing that, then that's fine. Then he needs to like talk to the right people in housing and stuff and say, hey, we're gonna like let go of our housing here, and my spouse is moving home, because there is a huge pay scale difference overseas versus if your spouse is living home, because then it just becomes a deployment versus a living here. So, and I think that that becomes an issue in a lot of places in the States too. If you move out of your on post housing for 6 months to go home with the family, it may become an issue when they can't get a hold of you, or they need to come do something in the house and you're
Well,
not
I
there.
think
So like,
that's really important too, just to kind of notate, like, making sure, like, even if you want nothing to do with your FRG or whatever it is, your key spouse, anything like that, it is so unbelievably important that your service member puts the make sure they put that correct information down. The amount of times I've had where I've called a phone number to a Walmart or something freaking crazy. Like, you all are probably laughing listening to this, but we've had some of the craziest things. We've had soldiers put their mistresses on the caller list and everything like that. And even though the key callers and the FRG leaders are all volunteers, there is still a code that they have to follow. There are still rules that they have to follow and they can't break because they are bound by an agreement with the United States Army, military, whoever, what branch they are. And if your information is not on there, the soldier hasn't given the permission to contact you, we can't fit, like, the callers physically cannot tell you information. So you won't get information of redeployment. You won't get information on updates if there's any type of updates during the deployment, things like that. So putting your information on a key caller list, FRG roster, is just that. If you don't want to read the emails, don't read the emails. I would encourage you guys to read the emails because a lot of times they are full of amazing resources for that branch or that installation specifically. But that's just, if it's not something you're interested in, delete it. But it's such a good
And if
resource.
you're not sure your spouse has updated it, you can always reach out to the FRG leader and
Yes.
be like, here's my contact information. Like, make sure they have it because.
Or come to those deployment briefs. Come to the deployment briefs. Make sure your information's correct. Make sure the correct spelling of your email, correct phone number. The other thing is making sure that your service member, this is a big one, and I don't think a lot of people think about this one, but the next of kin roster, next of kin paperwork. So there's a little box on there that checks to notify, like, of any type of anything other than like a KIA. And a lot of soldiers will put no. But here's the deal. You put no on that. I can't tell you when they're coming home. I can't tell you, hey, the news is reporting so-and-so got injured. I legally can't tell you, neither can the company. We legally cannot have a conversation with you saying, oh yeah, no, your service member is coming home on X, Y, and Z's date. It's going to be like, da-da-da. Jeremy did not check this for me for one deployment. And boy, did I throw him through the ringer. I was so unbelievably mad at him. And he was just like, well, I figured you would know. And I was like, I'm the FRG leader, and they legally could not tell me. I only knew because I was given the roster to call the other people. I did not and they had to work around telling me which flight my own husband was on because I wasn't legally didn't check that. Like when he told me that, like, so the battalion commander's wife called me and was just like, hey, I have a problem and I don't want you to be upset with me. And I was like, well, I'm not gonna be upset with you because obviously it's not your fault. And she told me and I was like, so I sent Jeremy a message and I was like, you need to call me ASAP. And he called me, he goes, what's up? I was like, first off, we have been married for, I think this was like 13 years at that point. 13 years. We have been through countless deployments together. What in your right mind were you thinking that this was like, okay, not to check this? And he's like, oh, I just figured, like, I just didn't need to put that. I was like, no. And I was like, and you need to go tell every single one of your soldiers. Because I was like, they're sending paperwork around right now. Because I think I had like 4 soldiers out of the entire company who had checked yes. I was like, they want their family members to know that they're coming home. You need to go to it. And I was like, and if you do not sign that paperwork, boy, when you get home, you are in for a world of hurt because like this is not okay.
You better figure out how to walk home because I won't be there.
I was so angry at him. I was like, even if it's something that's not pertaining to you, people want to know the information.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are confronted with like, I'm sorry, I can't tell you, when people are in an emotional state, they don't think clearly and they're not always nice. So taking that opportunity and like, knowing your family members, like we had a few family members in the past who were like, yes, we are not physically telling that family member. We can talk to the dad, but that mama, I'm sorry, no. Like we can't physically tell her something. Someone got hurt because then whatever the case is. But leave that to the individual soldiers to kind of communicate that. And I had so many who did that. They're like, hey, Miss Ashley, Mama Brown. They were like, hey, my mom is on the roster, but if something bad happens, I'm giving you permission to only tell my dad, here's his number. Because they're only going to have one contact on the roster. So it's whoever your contact want to be. And then making sure they're on there. Because like your counterparts are not always doing their job as well. The amount of times I've been like, hey, like this roster hasn't been updated in 4 months. I need a new roster. You have to, you know, make sure your information's on there, and that's going to those deployment briefs, going to those family days and meeting your FRG just to say hi, put a face to the person. And you have to do your due diligence on like whether or not how involved you want to be. That's up to you, but making sure your information is correct is so important, and making sure your soldier knows that it's important, whether you
Yeah.
are a mother, whatever.
So making sure you're prepared is obviously the first step. So if you have listened to that, that's obviously the big things that are going to be part of getting prepared for deployment. I think we have a PDF that we can share that kind of has the checklist of all those things that are like
Yeah.
the pre-deployment checklist that we will share on our Facebook page and Instagram and stuff afterwards so that you guys have that as well. But so the next thing is he's gone. Now you're left with X amount of time. I mean, that can run from 3 months to an entire year. What do you do with yourself? Because that time is going to drag.
So first off, I wanted to say Murphy is an ass, and he will show his ugly head at the most inconvenient times. And it could be something as simple as being sick. It could be a pipe bursting. It could be way more extreme. You're not in it alone.
We have
We've
whole episodes
all
about the
been
crap.
through we have all been through those hard times. And so that is where number one, it's really, really important to have at least one person in your corner, whether one person, a group, deployed love, whatever it is, have somebody that you can call and be like, I'm losing my mind. I need help. Whatever it is. Also utilize your rear D, because every branch, every unit's going to have a rear D, and they're literally doing nothing. So utilize them. You haven't been able to mow your yard, call that and say, hey, I really
Yeah,
need
I think
help.
a lot of spouses are intimidated by that because they are military members that you're usually reaching out to talk to, but they are really bored. I remember when we first moved to our
And
first
they
duty
want
station,
to
Dustin got
help.
stuck on Rudy because his unit
Mhm.
had just deployed as he got there. And he had to be there still for 8 hours a day. And it was like, what are you doing? So you
But
literally can
and
use
they
them for things like
genuinely
that.
want to help. Like I personally have not met a single person who's left on rear D who hasn't been like, oh my gosh, like so and so's wife is having a hard time. Yes, let me come help them. I had to move during the JRTC rotation, like very last minute, and there we had people come out from the company to help. My in-laws drove up to help, and so it was, really, really helpful to have that support when, all I thought was like, I'm gonna have to move this entire house by myself with two small kids. I was like, how am I gonna be able, how am I gonna do
Mhm.
this? And so they're there to support you. They have people literally set aside for, like, most units will have like one or two people going like, hey, like, we have this situation with this spouse and they have to move, or they need help with lawn care, anything like that. Like, they want to help, so utilize that. That's where, at least having the rear D commanders information, the FRG leaders information, just being like, hey, like, I just can't get my head above water, like my pipe has burst, I have this, I need help. And they'll help you find it, whether it's going through the chaplain, going through another organization on base. They'll help you find somebody or a company that will help you through a very trying time. And just know that no matter what Murphy does, we all don't like Murphy, um that you will find you'll get through it. I guess like my
Yeah.
biggest thing is like
Because
there
there
will
are
be
some tasks that are just very like guy tasks. Like I'm
yes.
not going to go pay to go to a car place to get my light bulb, like my headlights changed. I know it's like a 5-second task. I know this. So it's like if you're willing to just even stop by the unit and be like,
Mhm.
hey, is somebody here that can change this for me? They're sitting there. I can promise you they are sitting there on their phone scrolling because they have nothing to do during rear D besides like the extra tasks, right? So they're kind of just around to answer phone calls, to help in the barracks, to help
Yep.
with the spouses. Use them because I know Dustin during his deployment when he was on radio would have been thrilled to have spent 2 hours mowing a lawn and not just sitting there doing nothing. So like,
Yeah.
they're not going to be mad about it.
No, and like I said, like, and I mean, it won't hurt to ask. Like, you can always say, hey, like, is there anyone who can come? Like, I just had a baby. I haven't been able to mow the lawn. I have everything here for the person. They can come use my equipment, but is there
Mm-hmm.
anyone that can come do it? And I guarantee you will have people fighting over like who gets to go
Yeah, it's
over.
a nice out of the office chore. They're
Yeah.
not
So number one, just like after your service member leaves, things may
find
get
your
bumpy.
resources. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
get bumpy, find your tribe, things like that, but then, like, then once everything settles down, you get back into your routine because that's important. I'm a firm believer that you have to stick to your routine. Don't change things up so drastically for yourself, and, everyone has to do their what's best for them, so if that means moving home, do that, but I'm a firm believer that, like, if you're disrupting we already move every 2 to 3 years, going home, especially if kids, like, moving them around so much, like, you might think it's better because you have support, but that's why it's so important to build a support system each place you go. And I know that can be really
yeah,
hard
I
for
can see the only
people.
time I might have done that would have been like if Dustin had gone on a full year deployment
Yeah.
right after I had a baby. Like
Yeah.
I could see that being a choice where you're like, hey, I don't really have a routine yet, and I really need the help to
Especially,
get
like, if
through
you
this
just get there. Yeah.
because that's like a very like physically in demand need help. Like
But
you
those
can have friends, but they're not going to come live in your house with you, right?
and
Like
that
so,
and that all comes with its own struggles too. Like, you're moving into back home with your parents. You're not moving into your
mhm,
own space. So, like, just kind of like weigh the pros and cons for that specific time of your life. You're in school and you need that extra support, like, that may be the best decision,
yeah.
living in and sharing a bed with your kids for a year. You guys have to make your own decision, but know that, like,
It's so much easier to get through a deployment when you have a routine though, like you're
yeah.
saying, like, especially with older kids, they wanna stay in their
Well,
school, they
and, like,
wanna, like, see their
don't
same friends.
I was a victim of this, like, when I was much younger, I would be like, "I'm not gonna go on vacations without my husband, I'm not gonna do all these things," and I come to realize that, like, that's not hurting me, that's hurting my kids too, like, if they're not getting to
Mhm.
experience spring breaks and summer vacations my husband has been gone every single summer for the last 4 years, for, like,
Like, can
90% of
you
the summer,
imagine not doing anything
and
just
I'm
because?
like,
Like, that'd be so
I
sad.
and I, like, told him, I was like, I would love for you to go this, like, we went to Disney without him with my parents and my siblings because he was at JRTC that year, and I was like, "I'm sorry, but, like, I'm not gonna say no for the kids to not go to this because you're at JRTC, and the only time you can go is at Christmas because I refuse to go at Christmas time during, like, the most busy time of year, but, you have to do what's best for your family at that time, and that may be vacations without your service member. That may be just getting on with life and doing all the things and doing all the activities and things like that, so I think it's really important that you also, as a spouse, find something to fill your time. Don't kind of just sit and wallow because that's just not healthy for you. It's not healthy for your relationship because if you are sad and depressed and things like that, it's going to affect your relationship with your service member while they're gone. So find a new
Yeah.
hobby. I always take deployments as a time to start a new hobby. Try
Or
something
get a
new.
job. So I know that, like, before I had kids, I got a random job. I worked at Cold Stone for an entire year. Like, it was a job that has nothing to do with having a career or moving
Yeah.
forward in any way, but it was fun, and
Yep.
I made friends, and I was busy all the time, and I got to eat a lot of ice cream, a lot of free ice cream, which is also great when you're going through deployments. So,
We all know that we
and
have our moments where we just sit with a carton of ice cream.
yeah.
That
So I
is
could just bring it
okay.
home for free every night, and I had like my freezer stocked full of ice cream. So like it it was a great job. Like it doesn't have to
Mhm.
be like you're starting a new career because your husband's gone. You can go take a part-time job, a full-time job, making cookies, reading books, like whatever
Find
that
some
is.
Just find
But
something that's filling that time
get
that
busy.
is going
Yeah.
to better yourself. It's
Mhm.
okay to wallow, but don't wallow the whole time. Like, it's okay to be in our feels because we're gonna need that. We're especially if you're a female spouse, we can be emotional at times. We it's okay to cry. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to hate everything that is happening in your life right now. But at the same time, like finding something that brings you joy will just
Mhm.
make the time go by faster. Reading for me, like like I like literally cannot thank Sabrina enough for getting me back into reading. Like it was so important to me growing up, and I don't know why I just kind of stopped. But that has gotten me through some rapid deployments. It's gotten me through like, you know, being up here by myself and not having a ton of people that I know and things like that. And so finding something that's going to make you feel better about yourself is really important. And it's really going to help you
Yeah.
navigate the waters of a deployment because they
So
can
like
be threatening.
hobbies, jobs. Another one that I like to do because I am a stay-at-home mom for the most part. I mean, I have like some virtual things that I do, but like this was a great opportunity because my husband doesn't always want to go visit my friends that live in other states. Like if they're on our way somewhere, maybe we'll stop, but he's not going to enjoy a full week with some of my best girlfriends.
Mhm.
So that was always a time I'm like, hey, I got nothing going on now. Like my kids, we can come, we can travel. What do you want to do? And we'd meet up. And that was always super fun because it was like a countdown. It gives you like that something
Yeah.
to, hey, in 3 weeks we're going to see Erica. In 2 weeks we're going to see her. You know, it's like it counts down, and that makes time go so much faster.
Yeah. And that's such a like great opportunity to do those type of things. Like, you know, and then also like what we do when Jeremy's gone is like we'll either the kid I have the kids do the same thing. Like I don't just do this. Like I don't just start new hobbies or do things like that. I also encourage my kids to do that so that they can share it with dad when he gets home or have something to talk about when they call, because we all know kids aren't, I mean, my kids are kind of like good for 2 minutes, 3 minutes of talking, and then their like attention span is gone and they're ready to go back to playing or whatever it is. And so it gives them something to be like, oh my gosh, yeah, like I started this today, or I went to dance class for the first time today and I got to do this, this, and this. And it gives them something to talk about and then to show their dad when they get home, mom, dad, whoever it is. And at the same time, we also go and explore new places that we haven't been to yet, like in our surrounding area. Which was kind of my hope for this summer, but that did not happen because I felt like the summer went by really fast. So we did not do as much exploring as I had hoped
Yeah.
to. So, but you know, that's always something that we go explore and we find a new place that we really, really like. And then we take dad to it when he gets home so that he can experience with us. And the kids get all excited because they already know what's there so they can go show them. Sometimes that works out. Sometimes it doesn't work out, you know, depending on the place and the mood of the day. But I think it's just so important to find things to not for yourself but also for your kids if you have kids, if you're a mom, a sister, any person within the unit of that service member's family. Don't be glued to the news. Find out if you are a person who can watch the news when your service member is deployed or if you're not, and then find out if you're a person who can talk about it or not, because there are, I mean, everyone handles things differently and you have to make sure that you can handle it and talk about it without kind of spiraling out and causing stress on you, because again, if you're stressed and you're upset and everything like that, your service member is going to be the same. I think that's a really great way to kind of talk about communication is so key
Yeah, I mean that's the
in
step three
general.
that we have on
Yeah.
here is like you go through getting prepped, and that's a lot of communication.
Yeah.
The time passing kind of step of number two is kind of an interpersonal, like getting to know yourself and figuring out how to like get through time. But then communicating does not just count. So step three is communicating, but that's not just with your spouse. That's communicating with family. That's
Family.
communicating with your kids. It's a huge part of a
Yeah.
deployment.
Yeah. Well, I think this is in general in the military life, it is key to have a good communication between your service member and yourself specifically, but also with the other family members, setting those boundaries, setting those expectations, and all those things that you need to have the conversations about prior to the deployment, during the deployment, and after the deployment. I think one of the biggest things that we see a lot of spouses complain about is like, you know, my service member it just doesn't seem himself, or he's quiet, or he's not talking as much. And I think it's just important to kind of state that they're in a war zone, y'all. Even if they're not necessarily in a war zone, like say they're at Kuwait and they're just sitting on the base, they're in a different environment. They are not in a relaxed environment. They are in a high stress environment, whether it's combat or they're just surrounded by a bunch of work people all day and they have to be on alert constantly of, you know, is the commanding officer coming in the door or anything like that. And so their demeanor can change. We grow as human beings, we don't stop growing, we don't stop learning. And so you have to kind of keep that in mind, that don't always jump to conclusions that it's bad, because it's
Yeah.
probably not. Like I mean, I've been married to Jeremy for 14 years. We've been through 5 deployments. Some of those have been 12 to 14 months long. Some of them only been a few months. And there has been time in every single one of them where communication was really, really good. We talked really well. And then there were other
Mhm.
parts where I'm just like, something's wrong. Is it me? You know, we all go through that spiral and things like that. Don't jump to that conclusion, and don't try to push things. Like I remember our first deployment, Jeremy would not share anything that was happening. He thought that I couldn't handle it. He thought I would freak out, things like that. And it caused a lot of problems because he was under a lot of stress. He went through a lot of traumatizing things, and he wasn't sharing that with me because he just didn't think I could handle it. And when he came home from that deployment, we sat down and I had a conversation. I was like, look, I'm a big girl. I may worry about you. I may not like what I hear, but it's obvious that you need to share what's on your chest with me. And you don't have to give me all the details, but give me enough to where you can feel like, you know, because his big thing was like, you know, I just don't feel like you are understanding what I'm going through. And I was like, I will never understand what you go through. I will never be able to fully comprehend what you go through. I mean, till this day, even if I watch movies related to military life, I bawl my
It's not
eyes
the
out
same.
because
No.
I am just like, I could not imagine what you guys go through. I can't. I've never been
Mhm.
in it. I will never understand what you go through, but I'm here and I can be a good listener, and I can provide encouragement, and I can provide love to you to help however I can. I mean, it just may be that I'm sitting here and letting you vent. That's all I can do. I know for myself, and something that I think every military spouse has to learn, because it's something we just have to learn. It's not about us. Like, don't take offense when they are upset or short with you. It took me a while to learn that. I won't lie. It took me a while to be like, why are you so short with me? Why are you being so ugly? It's just because that is the
Well,
first
and
time they're gonna really express their
every
frustration.
human kind of processes trauma in a very, very different way too. So like I didn't even know some of the things that Dustin had gone through in his really big, when they both deployed when they were really young, until years later. And it just was because I'd be like listening to him talk to his battle buddies, and you'd like, oh, well, why didn't you ever tell me anything about that? And it's either they were not sure I could handle it, or it was just something he didn't want to talk
What?
about. And I
Yeah.
think that's totally okay that you could just let them deal with that. If they want to go to a therapist in the future and talk about things, then that's up to them. It is their mental game and their things that they have to overcome. They don't have to tell you things. And like if they get to a point later down the road where it's so far off that they want to sit down and be like, hey, so this is what happened. And Dustin, if I have had that conversation since, and it's like, oh, like you kind of build up this thing in your head where you're like, oh, was it really, really bad? And we just didn't know
Yeah.
about it. Like, or what was it? And it was just like, hey, I wasn't ready to process that.
Yeah.
And
Well, I think having that
that's fine.
conversation about like how your preferred communication is during like high stress is important too. Like, so having that conversation for me and Jeremy, both of us, it's written when we are both, I mean, we're both Scorpios, which is crazy that we're both Scorpios, but like we both have different ways of like handling stress differently. I'm very emotional about it, and I let things bottleneck. So like something super tiny can like set me off and be like, just him being like really short in a sentence, and I'll be like I'm off. So like we've come to the conclusion after 14 years of marriage, 18 years together, that if it's something that's super high stress and then we need to communicate it, and we want to make sure we communicate it in a way that isn't going to trigger the other person, because that can happen, we take a step back and say, okay, hey, you know what, you're really stressed out. Why don't you, when you have a moment, take the time to collect your thoughts, and then send me an email, send me a text, send me a message, however you're communicating. Because I say email, but like I feel like that's not the way everyone communicates anymore. But and then we talk that way, and we're able to like think our thoughts out before kind of like popping off. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's a lot. Remember, it's a high stress. You're stressed, they're stressed, so you have to kind of figure out which way best to communicate during those times. And then, like I said, don't take offense when you don't think they're communicating. They could just, I know Jeremy shuts down when he's really stressed. Like I mean, A, he's not a big talker to begin with. Like, if you've been listening to us for the last 4 years, he is the introvert, I'm the extrovert. I literally have to pull conversations out of him just on, like, how his day is. And that took me a really long time to come to terms with. Like, I'm just like, "I'm your wife, you should be talking to me," like, all this other kind of stuff, and he's just not a talker. But, you know, thankfully, the second deployment around, after our conversation, he was just like, "Yeah, you know, this is what happened today. This really freaked me out." And I, obviously heard some things that I didn't like. I was very scared. I had nightmares for days on, but I also didn't let him know that. Like, I knew that that was something, like, I knew he needed to tell me this so that he can function and do his job and come home safely. And
Yeah.
so, but that's where that communication is. That communication comes in. What can your spouse handle? What can they not handle? And don't make the decision for them. So, like, same thing for you as a spouse. Don't expect something from them knowing that that might not be something they can do. They might not be able to process what they're going through. Same thing, like how you were saying, Jeremy took him, I still find out things 14 years later
Me
about
too.
deployments that happened when we first got
Yeah.
married, because in those conversations, just because, like, he just was
Those
like,
were just
"Oh,
such
it's
more serious deployments. Like, I mean, some of the things they've done since are,
yeah."
but those were just like all the time action for 12
Jeremy shouldn't
months.
have come home. Like, and that's one of those things is like, I remember him telling me, so he was a driver in his first deployment, baby in the military. He was a driver, and a missile hit his truck, but it just so happened to hit it the wrong, like, it flipped over and hit and bounced off right in front of him. And I remember he was like, "I had to come call you." He's like, "That was way too close for comfort. I needed to tell you I love you. If something happens to me, you are the love of my life, blah blah blah." And I was bawling, and I was like, "Why?" Like, and at first I wanted to be like, "Why are you telling me this?" And I was like, "Wait, he needed to tell me this. He needed to tell me that it's not all sunshines and rainbows right now. Like, it's not, and sometimes it can be like a super easy breezy lemon squeeze,
Yeah.
like
Dustin's
TDY.
story is very, very similar to
Yeah,
that. He wasn't the driver, but he was in a vehicle, and
yeah,
same thing, IED situation. It's like I didn't know about it though for years,
yeah.
like the actual story of that. So
Yeah. Well, Jeremy, after all the deployments, like after that first one, he's always told me like what happened, whether it was during that time through the rapid deployments. He wasn't able to tell me very much during the event, especially like when he went to the
yeah.
evacuations. Um, but I mean, he did say like, this is like the only thing he did tell me during it, and the only reason I got to speak to him was because I was the FRG leader, and he was communicating to me things that needed to be sent out to families at that time. And the only thing he told me was, he goes, "Out of all of my experience, this is the worst thing I've ever experienced." And that was all he said. And I was like, "I'm so sorry. I wish I was there to give you comfort, help you and how you can be." And that's all he needed to hear. He just needed to know that I was here to support him, and that I loved him, and I was going to be here when he came home.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you have to, I feel like every family is different. Every single soldier is different. And you have to have that communication and expectations through the line of whether it's a deployment, TDY. I remember when Jeremy went to Australia for this training event, and I was so mad at him because he was like snorkeling and drinking and having the time of his life. And I was at home with I literally had a newborn baby, and I was just like,
Mhm.
fuck you.
Yep,
Like, I
that
was
was
so
Dustin's. He went TDY to Florida when I was in Germany with a baby. It's like,
I
what
was
in the
so mad.
world?
And I was like, "I'm not mad at you, but I'm mad that, like, you are, like, throwing this in my face." And
Like,
he wasn't
why?
throwing
Yeah.
it in my face, because I was like, I'm happy that you have this opportunity. Like, not a lot of people get this opportunity to go do this training and to swim in the corals of Australia or whatever it is gonna be. Like, I'm so happy for you, but right now, I have a shirt that I've had on for 3 days that's got throw up stains on it, and I stink, and my hair hasn't been washed in a week. So, good for
Yeah.
you, but at the same time, like, also know that, like, I'm, like, and I had to communicate that. I was like, "I love this for you, but if you tell me one more time that you're drinking on a boat and I'm literally covered in vomit, we are going to go realms, because that is just, it's not okay for me. Like, I'm so
Nope.
happy that you guys
Yep,
have
it
done
was the
2
exact
days of
same thing. Like,
me,
Dustin
like,
was out partying with his friends, and he would tell me all the funny stories, and I'm like, "It's not funny to me because I'm sitting here not having a good time. So far
and
from family, like, I have nobody to help me with a new child, like, I'm not having a great time, so please don't like, no."
that's where, like I said, communication is key no matter what part of your journey in the military life it is, whether it's like every single day life, your struggles. It's something that, like, I know we've talked about this so many times on different podcasts. Like, it's something you have to revisit all the time. Like, if you're starting to feel that that communication's slipping, sit down and have that conversation. If it gets to the point where, like, it's so uncomfortable, that's at that point, having a conversation about your feelings shouldn't be uncomfortable if your significant other truly respects the person in front of you. So having that's so important, y'all.
If it gets to a point where you don't feel like you have that, then you need to reach out to, like, one source or
Yeah.
somewhere that can
Utilize
the
the resources.
chaplain, yeah,
Yeah, read a
somewhere that can
and
help you.
and those, like the chaplain, like, you don't have to have faith to use a chaplain. I mean, obviously they're going to, like, pull in the faith aspect of it, but you can utilize a chaplain.
They're humans, they're military members too, and they're super respectful. So if you
Yeah.
say come in and say like, "Hey, we are not really affiliated," I think they will still help you in
Yeah.
ways and try to like lower the
Or
bringing the
they'll
church into the
Yeah,
situation. So
and they're gonna help you. I mean, they're just a great overall resource, specifically because, like, they're connected to so many other resources that, like, if you go
mhm.
in and say, like, there's a chaplain assigned to every battalion. There's someone there, and if you could just say, "Hey, like, we're really struggling with this. We don't really believe, like, whether you believe in God or you don't believe in it, whether you're Jewish, whatever it is," they will be able to point you in the right direction of how to get assistance. Also, counseling, you can go to any, like, you don't have to have a referral for counseling. You can go and have counseling wherever, and they'll cover it as long as it's covered by the TRICARE insurance. You don't have to have a referral. So you don't have to go through your PCM or anything like that. You can just go, and there's so many online resources like Military One Source and so many other, or the Coning Clinic. There's so many different organizations out there that you can utilize. And I think that's important. And I feel like, especially nowadays, encourage your service member to get help if you feel like they need help. And if that is just talking to other people in a support group or whatever, that's fine. But, they
There's just
just,
so many resources. I mean,
so
even the
many.
VFW itself, I think a lot of veterans don't join the VFW until they're old. And they have so many resources that if you were to attend their things that they can get you in connection with. Plus, then you're also going to this place that has meetings, that has fun events, that has all these things going on, and everybody there is associated with veterans. So it's like
Well,
you're
and
already part of your community. It's a super
yeah,
easy resource to just be like, hey, and I know every town has one. Our tiny, teeny, tiny town in Nebraska has a VFW.
yeah.
Like it exists
It
everywhere.
is. And then also, like, with the age of, like, social media and things like that, like, if you really look, you will find someone that you can connect with and talk, whether it's another person who went through a similar situation. I think that's one of the perks of having social media nowadays, is that you can connect with organizations that you may not know about. You may be able to connect with other veterans or other military spouses who have dealt with the same thing. Just, you have to make those choices based off of what's best for you.
Yeah,
Which,
and we talked about that on the last episode with Brittany. Was like, hey, there is this social stigma now of like you don't have to talk or connect to these people personally, but there's so many veterans, there's so many active duty, there's so many military spouses on social platforms, even if it's like TikTok, that you can just relate to them and realize that like everybody's going through very similar things. We're all part of the same government agency. Like when it comes down to it, we're all part of the Department of
uh-huh.
Defense, right? Like we've dealt with same stories on every branch, and like finding where that fits into your life. If it
Yeah.
is just sitting on social media and that makes you feel better, following those content creators who have things that relate to what you've been through or can understand what you've dealt with, then that's fine too. Like I
Mhm.
know a lot of like especially military men are not super comfortable with counseling and that kind of situation, and that's
Yeah.
okay. But if you need to find your community wherever that is.
Yeah. And it's all about, like, don't let bad apples, like, ruin the experience for you. Like, you know, there's so many individuals in the world who genuinely want to help veterans and families, whether it's in the mental sector, like active duty sector, wherever it is. There's us here. I mean, that's why we do the podcast. That's why we both are involved with Deployed Love and all these other organizations that we've had our hands in over the years, whether it's FRG and other nonprofits. There are
Mhm.
people out there who genuinely want to make sure that you feel supported and loved through your journey, whether you're a new spouse, a seasoned spouse, a veteran, active duty, whatever it is. There is somebody out there that can help you. And it could literally take you just searching on TikTok or Instagram to say, oh, you know what, this person is like providing some good content. Or even if you go and just find some of the humor sites and you just need to laugh about how
Yeah.
stupid some of the things that we deal with in the military, because we some of the I mean, we all know, like, you know, some of the things that we deal with. I mean, we are a melting pot of
Just shouldn't
people.
happen. They
There's
shouldn't
just this
happen.
stuff happens, and sometimes you just need to laugh about how shitty it is and
Yeah.
move on with the day. And so, you know, there are so many amazing individuals, and if you are like, hey, I haven't had luck finding this, reach out to us. We are connected well enough to where if we don't know a person, we can reach
We
out to
know a
our
person who
contact
knows a person.
and
Yeah.
who could help you find it. I mean, like, whether you're at an installation or you're looking for someone like virtually just to connect with, there is somebody out there to help you. And I think that,
That goes into the fourth
yeah,
step with reintegration. And I mean, the
I feel
biggest
like,
thing of reintegration again is communication, and it's
yeah,
going from digital communication when they're deployed.
hmm
Most everything is over the camera, over emails, over letters, like stuff like that. To suddenly, hey, you're here in my face. How do we get back to not what we were before, but back to some sort of
who
normalcy
we
inside
are
our
going to be
house?
now. Yeah. So first things first, like before we like dive directly into that, I wanted to kind of notate that I said it at the very beginning of the podcast, but setting, it's okay to set boundaries, y'all. It's okay to set expectations with your family, like your immediate family, your spouse and your kids, but with your extended family as well. I
Mhm.
actually saw so many posts about this week about, like, you know,
I saw it
service
too.
members and who are having conflict of like who they would want there to be home for their homecoming, and every family's different. I You know, that first deployment is always special, so like everybody wants to be there. That's great, that's fine. But a lot of people don't understand is that your service member may be home, but they're still working. So like if you have families who are like, hey, like I want to travel to see him, and they're paying for flights, and we know like today's economy is just awful, encourage
Mhm.
them to come at a later date. Say, hey, we would love for you to be here, but you won't get to spend time with him. He'll be
Yeah, I
home.
can
He'll
record it,
have
or
to
I
go back
can,
to work.
they still get the experience, but
Yes. But, you know, but if you genuinely want to be there to like hold him and hug him and spend time with him, come on Friday, so they get home on Monday. They're supposed to have a 4-day weekend. Come that weekend, so we can do things as a family together, and that gives your service member time to unwind. I've been really fortunate. My in-laws were there for the first deployment, but all the other deployments, they didn't come the day of. They always plan, hey, like we'll come the weekend to say hi, take you guys to dinner, things like that. Now we've thankfully all of his deployments we've lived within like a short driving distance from his parents. But, you know, every family has to make this decision, but it's okay for you to say, hey, we know you guys want to be here, but let you know, like I'm gonna have to go back to work. And I would encourage your service member to be the person that says this, because like it always puts spouses in a weird position to like tell the service member's family, you know, like, hey, no, we don't want you to come, like, because then it just comes off as you being greedy and things like that, and you're not being greedy. Don't let anyone make you feel that way. It is your family. This is your time
yeah.
together, and it's
I
going
think
to
if
take
they
time.
insist on coming, an easier boundary at least is like, "Hey, that's fine, but I do expect you to get a hotel or an Airbnb
Yeah,
outside of our home," because I think that
yeah,
that is a big invasion of privacy and not having a boundary of, because you're gonna come home and whether you have communicated or not is gonna be very obvious. You're
yeah.
also maybe you want to reconnect, rekindle that flame right away, and how awkward after 6 months,
And
a year
I think
away is
that's
that going to be with your mom next door?
I think
Right.
that's so important too, because like I've seen so many spouses complain like he's been home for 2 days and we haven't been intimate. And number one, first off, they're probably so unbelievably exhausted. Like to
Just jet
like
lag
I mean,
alone. Yeah.
just traveling alone, but I mean, like, they're up from a different time zone, they're still working, things like that, don't read into it too much. Like, again, communicate like, "Hey, like, is something wrong? Like, what's going on?" Everyone handles trauma differently depending on how, like, their deployment was and everything like that. So, just kinda keep that, don't just obviously jump to the conclusion of like, "Oh my god, he doesn't love me anymore," or "He's having an affair," or anything like that. Like, hey, you've been home for a couple days, you haven't been very intimate, like, what's going on? Have that conversation. Don't be defensive about it. Just be like, hey, like, I noticed this, like, is something wrong? Do we need to plan like a trip together where it's just the two of us? It can be overwhelming. If you have kids, you've got the kids who have not seen their dad and they're climbing all over them. There's a lot of noise,
Mhm.
there's a lot of things happening. They're going from living with a bunch of guys, going back into their really quiet. Like, that was Jeremy's biggest thing, is going from a very loud situation to a very quiet situation, and he wouldn't sleep. Like, he, his tinnitus and things like that, like, he just doesn't, like, didn't always transition very well. And so just there's it can take a really long time to reintegrate into like a normal routine, because you're starting a whole new routine. You're adding another person back into your life. Like, take into account, like, you've been single parenting. If you're a mom or a dad who's been single parenting and that parent comes back in and they're like, oh, they do something. We're like, oh, wait, we don't do that anymore. I'm like, well, that's not his fault, her fault.
Yeah.
You guys have to communicate like, hey, like, we have a new discipline, like, tracker or whatever it may be, like how you guys handle like a situation, because like a lot changes just in a month.
And grace on both sides. Like, I think you need to, as a military spouse that's coming home, needs to maybe just kind of take a step back and like watch how things are going in the house instead of like immediately putting themselves into things. Because even I would be more graceful if he didn't do chores for the first week, to just kind of see who's been doing chores, especially as we have older kids, like who does what, before he like takes over this kid's chore and then she's pissed because he didn't have to do a chore. Like, it's so much easier for him to be like, okay, take this first week and just kind of see how the household is running. This is how I've been dealing with punishment. This is how we've been doing with screen time. This is how we've been dealing with communication. And then be like, okay, now where do
Communicating that
you
is
fit into
key.
that puzzle?
Yes. But I feel like communicating that is key, because like you'll have like spouses, like I used to get so like, you're home, like you can help out, like you can just don't just sit there on the couch, because like, yeah, you've been deployed, but I've been here solo by myself for the whole year. So like having that communication of like, and I think it's like you can start having that communication before he comes home, like say, hey, like, this is like, like I always ask Jeremy, like, hey, what are some things that you want to do when you get home? Like, what do you physically need to like get back in the flow? And so he'll a lot of be like, like I would like 1 or 2 days where I just do absolutely nothing, like watch movies, snuggle, things like that. And I'm like, perfect, we can do that. And then,
Mm-hmm.
having those conversations of, okay, well, okay, we're weekend, you're back to work, kids are back into their routine. What are some things that you are going to start doing now that you're home? And having those conversations. And again, it's you're going to have that conversation. It's a whole new conversation. That conversation you had at the beginning of the year isn't going to be that same conversation coming home, because things change and there's new routines and things
It
like that.
is
So
super
it's just super
hard
hard.
as the stay-at-home spouse or the one who was home during the deployment, because you do want to be like, okay, now you can come back to doing everything you used to do, and you can survive another
Yeah.
week. I know you can do it and get through that first week of doing what you're used to in your routine, and then it will all come together a lot better that way. If you're not expecting him to be involved the first week, and if he chooses to, then great. I mean, that's fantastic if he wants to
Yeah.
help with things and gets involved right away, but like, just make it a really slow thing. Like, let it be a process, not just like a, okay, tomorrow we're going back to normal. Like,
Yeah.
it's not going to
Yeah,
work out for
exactly.
you. It's gonna
It
cause
won't work out.
argument.
It's not gonna work. It's gonna backfire on you as well, because
Mhm.
like you're gonna be like, oh wait, like, oh, we don't, like, oh, we're potty training now. I mean, you could have probably have told your partner that, hey, like, we're potty training now, but like again, so much
Yeah,
happens.
yeah.
I mean, I can't like always remember everything that happened the day before, and I'm at home. So, hey, oh, this is how we potty train, because obviously that's another thing. Like, everything is different. So like, oh, we give, if he goes potty, they get a Skittle, or hey, if they go potty, they get a sticker, or we don't do any type of award system. Like, those are conversations that you're gonna have, and there's going to be a lot of frustration, because like they're going to feel like they don't know their kids. They're going to feel like you've grown so much that like they're not needed because we take over everything when they're gone. Like my first thing I hand off is I'm like, oh, thank God he's home. I don't have to do the yard work. I hate yard work, y'all. I don't like
But
it.
don't save it up for the week that he gets home. Don't do that
No,
to him.
oh, no. The last deployment, so I'm so, like, here, this house here, the house that we're living in, like, the yard, the mowing is done through the whole neighborhood through the HOA, so, like, I don't have to mow. It's fantastic. But when we lived at the last house and he deployed, I actually paid for someone to come mow the yard. I was like, I'm not doing it. I don't have the time. I told him, I was like, I don't have the time to do this. It takes a solid hour
It's
and a half to
hard,
2
yeah.
hours. When you have young kids, you have to stop every 20 minutes to go check on them. And I'm like,
If not more often when they
less
keep
than
coming
that,
out and
actually.
asking questions and
So I was like, I'm going to pay someone to come mow it every 2 weeks. And that's done and done. Like, I was like, I'm not worried about it. Like, I probably could have called someone at the unit to do it, but I was like, I'm fine. There was someone who already came to mow my neighbor's yard. So I just walked out there and I was like, hey, my husband's deployed. I need someone to mow the yard for the next like 3 months. Can you do it? And he was like, yeah. I was like, same day as I do them. I was like, perfect. I was like, I'll make sure the dogs are not out when you come over and we'll be good to go. And it was one thing less off of my checklist. And Jeremy was like, oh, but it would just take you a few minutes. I'm like, no. It's
it
not
doesn't.
it's not an hour ordeal like it is for you. I have to stop and go check the kids. I have to, all these things like
Cook
that.
dinner, like other
And
things that have to
like
happen, yeah.
dinner, all the things, like, so, having those conversations about, okay, like, what are things that you can take off your plate during deployments, and then, like, when they come home, being like, yeah, don't, like, I always, like, I would cut the grass, like, the day before, like, you usually have a time frame, so, like, okay, I'm gonna cut the grass, like, this day or this day beforehand, so that way that is done, and you won't have to worry about it for 2 weeks, and all that kind of stuff. And then, like, obviously, like, all those honey-do lists, like, I try to do what, like, we learn to do so many things when they're gone,
Me
that,
too.
a lot of times service members come home and they feel unneeded. And that's where a lot of that disconnect can come in from. And it comes down with that like, again, communication is key. And like, oh, no. It's not that I don't need you. It was just like I had to. Like, we are put in the same type of position. You had to leave. I had to do this. Like, I had to take care of the car. I had to do all these different things. And I think it's just, I love when I see, like, that's one thing I love about, like, social media, is like watching all these military spouses who are like, my husband's deployed, so I'm renovating the home, and learning how to do all these different things.
Like,
And
super
it
cool
just
skills,
shows
yeah.
how diverse and how capable military spouses can be if they choose to do something about their situation. They choose to take a really shitty situation, and
Handle it gracefully, yeah.
yeah, we signed up for it, whatever. That, I hate that saying so much, but we can take a really crappy situation and we can make it to where it benefits us. Like, we're either utilizing it to better ourselves, we're utilizing it to better our home, better our kids, better our social networks, volunteering. I think it's like, if you're looking for a hobby or something to do, especially at installations, there are so many organizations that are looking for volunteers. Deployed Love,
All
if
the
you are
time.
listening and you want to be a part of Deployed Love, I don't care where you guys are, reach out to me. I will love to talk to you about how you can assist us, whether you become a coordinator, you are being an online person, whatever it is, you need something to fill your time and you want to give back to the military community. Deployed Love is across the country, and we would love to have more people in our network. But there are other organizations. There's the USO. There's, I know Liberty has like Rick's Place, and there's so many different places that you can go out and do stuff for military families, because we all have a special place for military families, whether you think it or not. You are part of a very unique set of people who most people just want to help each other out. And so if you're looking for an opportunity, there's so many. And again, that's something like, if you're like, hey, like, Deployed Life is just not my thing, I don't want to do social events, but I would love to help veterans, or I'd love to, help expecting mamas, or whatever it may be, we can point you in the right way. Because I
Yeah.
mean, and deep down, Deployed Love is all about deploying love to military families and helping military families be the very best they can be. And we know that we can't do all the things. And so, which is why we have the podcast. It's why we started the podcast, because we knew there were so many amazing organizations out there, whether it's for families or veterans or active duty. And so we, want to make sure that we can get the word out about all of those as much as we can, because there's just so much that we go through.
Yeah. And talking about deployed love, since this is mid-October when you guys are listening to this is holiday mini season time. So if you are listening to this because you're in the middle of a deployment and you are with your kids or even home with just your puppy or whatever, we have those mini sessions at a lot of bases this year. And you just have to kind of look for the information. It should be on our website. It's super exciting.
Yep. Yeah, so by the time this one comes out, Fort Carson's will already have happened. Fort Carson is doing it pretty early this year at the beginning of October. But if you are at Nellis Air Force Base, Camp Lejeune, which is one of our new installations, Fort Moore, Fort Liberty, and we finally got back Fort Cavazos, originally Fort Hood. We have holiday minis happening at all of those installations this year, and maybe potentially J-Bear. I'm not quite sure yet on J-Bear, but we may have a very small mini session there. But we are so excited. We have so many amazing coordinators this year who are putting on these events. And this is just such a fun time of year, especially if you have a service member. So if you know someone who is deployed at any of those installations, if you are there yourself and you know someone who's going to be deployed over the holiday season, a Gold Star family, or on a hardship tour, make sure you guys are following those pages, because they are going to be announcing all of those things really, really soon, if not already.
Yeah. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. The show notes will not only be on our show notes for this, but we'll have it on the blog on the website, because it's a great 4-step process and you'll be able to read through the show notes of what the show was. So if you're not able to listen to the whole episode, or if you got to this point, you probably have, but it will also be available there. So if you're wanting to share just the notes to how to get through a deployment, that'll be available to you as well. I hope you enjoyed it. We kind of broke it down to just kind of the 4 main things that you deal with as far as deployments coming up. So it's a great resource for anybody who is new to deployments or just needs a refresher. I know between my husband's first deployment and the more recent ones, it had been like a 9-year gap. Yeah. So
and every deployment is different. Every situation is different. The length of time that you know about it is all so different. And so, and there's things now that, like, when we were very young, aren't the same nowadays. Like, communication, like while they're overseas and everything, like, is so different. That's part of being in the military sector, is it's constantly evolving, y'all. And so we constantly have to learn new things. We constantly have to try new things out. What worked for you one deployment may not work the same way. And so if you find a resource, if you find something that works for you, feel free to share it with us. We would love to, like, help other families. And yeah, I feel like everyone's been different for me. So I there's no right or wrong way to handle
everything. Yeah.
I mean, really isn't. Like, I was like, they're not. I mean, there is wrong ways to handle a deployment, but everyone's different. So just kind of take what works for you and go with it. Make sure you have those key things in place, and it should be a somewhat seamless adventure for the most part.
Yeah. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you're able to ruck up through your deployment so that you're able to get through whatever time period that is. And as we like to say, ruck up, buttercup.